Good afternoon, it's Tuesday, March 12th, Senate institutions, starting a week after our break, and everybody looks rested and ready to go. As we customary, what we do at the start of the week, I'd like to have the committee introduce themselves, so we're gonna start over here.
Good afternoon, Wendy Harrison, Wyndham District. Irene Hunter, to the north, Good East.
You seemed a little uncertain there for a second.
I was focusing, no, I'm looking at the camera, focusing.
Ryan Collins from the Rutland District.
Linda Lehman, committee assistant.
Senator Russ Ingles from the Essex District, welcome, and thank my committee, I talked to my committee, I think they had some good time off, and, we're actually being quite, efficient with, us, we don't have a lot going on today, so we're gonna talked with a couple gentlemen who support us in our endeavors to have a great capital bill. We're gonna lead off with Scott today. So how are you, sir?
Good, Senator Ingles, how are you?
Good.
The record, Scott Moore, joined the fiscal office. I wanted to just come in and give some brief updates as to what's happening upstairs, so that we're kind of all on the same page as it were. So a couple of developments that we've had. I have been reaching out to various agencies looking at unspent dollars, things that they have had on their books for the past couple of years. That's part of the process. Is to go through and check in with these different agencies to, you were given $1 million in 2019, how much is left? How much is left to still be spent? And how much can we claw back as it were? I've heard from a number of them, so far I have found $17,000 that we don't add to the capital bill, so it's good.
Well, good.
There are, I think, 4 agencies I have yet to hear from. So if you're listening, agencies, I'll be sending an email reminder about some of these dollars. So that's one thing I've been working on. The other things we've done, we've started doing markup upstairs for the capital bill. We have basically gone through 2 or 3 of the sections on the spreadsheet to redistribute some of the dollars based on testimonies they've had. I haven't gotten much farther than that, but this week it is all markup. So that we're gonna be able to have everything ready to cross over, not this Friday, but the following Friday.
So they seem to be doing pretty well with it. They're making some good progress on it, Scott.
Yes, sir. I know chairmen have, I think, wanted to go through more before the break than we had a chance to. But this week, their agenda is basically capital bill all day, every day, except for today.
Yeah.
So they will be going through the rest of the sections. So with that said, I don't have much more of an update. I can speak to the fact that they are looking at so far taking the line items and mostly agreeing with the governor's positions thing. And then at least in these couple sections, and then ultimately in some of the cash sections, taking some of the money out to try to free up some money. Good, so.
Yeah.
So kind of where we are there.
No big initiatives as far as anything that we should be aware of or get ahead of or bring somebody in or anything like that. I think it's pretty much just going down through and.
Going down through the list, the same thing that we had, you guys have seen here, I've been following back and forth in a lot of the testimony. I hear both sides, so I spent time meeting break listening to both committees, make sure that anybody who come in testify, what kind of questions are you guys asking, they're different from upstairs, and which it helps me understand, as this is a new role for me, well, it helps, because then that will kind of point to some different things when there's potentially, what are you interested in versus past person.
Well, just if it gets asked, because we did pass out, this committee did a good job and we wrote a good bill as far as keeping the Salisbury Fish Factory open. We passed that out on Friday before we left, and we've had some offline communications with the Senate Appropriations, and it sounds like, I don't know where and how and what we'll let them do what they do, but it sounds like they are gonna find the avenue to fund it. So if anybody's got any questions about that, or feel free to come back, we can answer anything. Though everything's posted online, so they're just as after see it online or whatever, but if they have any questions about any of that stuff, we're more than happy to come up and testify or do whatever.
Sure, I was able to read the bill, but, I haven't spoken with Chair Evans about Salisbury. But if we'll be there the rest of the week upstairs all day.
Yep.
So she does have questions, but they have to convey that to you, let you know, and have you guys in if need be.
Sounds good, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Assuming, I know what that word means, that we do get approval from our neighbors across the hall. And it does come out of the capital bill, will that mean an additional line item in the bill itself?
Depending upon what happens, I think there one on here specifically, I don't think there's one specific
No.
for Salisbury.
No, there's,
There is one for. A&R.
you're right.
So I would have to defer a little bit to Damien Leonard, Ledge County,
Okay.
as to whether or not he's gonna write language that would add a new line item, or just take language and say, take this dollar amount potentially from like the A&R line item. But
Okay.
with that in mind, my guess is it would probably be a new line.
And I know from previous bills before where we've done stuff differently or whatever that weren't on our bill, a lot's gonna dictate what appropriation says as far as, you know, where they're gonna pull the money from. It could very well be that they pull it from general fund.
Yeah.
Which I would have a hard time believing that, because there's no money in general fund and we do have some flexibility in places in our bill. So, yeah, I think a lot of that would be how appropriation decides they wanna fund it.
And I'm not sure Chairman's intentions at all, as the committee's going through the bill in terms of freeing up money. At the end of the day, there might be some of that money that could be add one item for Salisbury, and if we're taking 100,000 from this line, 100,000 from that line.
Yep.
And add it to Salisbury.
Okay.
So I don't know if that is crossed her mind at all. I'm not privy to her. I'm not based on that, so that might be an option.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Otherwise, I would love to have a chance to come in maybe next week as well, or the end of this week. And just
Absolutely.
let you know again, as we go through markup, what, if any issues have come up or any major points on, make sure you guys are aware of.
We would love that. We'd love the opportunity to discuss with you about anything. I'm fairly positive that Chair Evans and I will meet on Thursday, as we have been meeting, but at any time that, you know, you see some stuff on there that, you think that we should be aware of, we'd be very appreciative, so we can work collaboratively together with, our House counterparts, or maybe come up with our own ideas, so. However it would work, it would be fine with us if you wanted to come in and, help us out.
Well, I anticipate the first half of the session, I've been up there all day, every day, and the second half of the session, I'll be down here.
All day, every day.
So-
At least in the afternoon.
I know this is your first year in this role and all that, but, has Chair Evans given you any indication for when they would, be able to vote that bill out? I know it's pretty early, but.
She hasn't said anything that yet. We talked a little bit about when crossover is. Happy to go in the room and someone asked if this was a bill that had to go out by this Friday. She said no. So in answer to somebody else's question, I understood that she's probably gonna vote it out, not this week, next
Yeah.
week. She'll take advantage of a couple.
Well, it's gonna be early, folks. I can tell you that is early, so that's good for us and, you know, I can tell you from years past, the two different bills that I've seen, we always haven't, had that much time, so, I would welcome that, so,
It would be, of course, contingent upon how long the committee takes to go through the rest of the bill,
of course,
the line items, but.
of course. So, yeah,
Yeah, I am heartened to hear, and I don't know what percentage of it is, that from the governor's recommend, there's not a great divergence so far from what you're saying.
The biggest things, plans, and, you know, Nick, you can speak to this if need be, but the two line items that we talked about previously, the St. Albans Garage and the youth facility that were put it in the bill this year for last year. She wants those to not be in the bill, which we think we already talked about. And I think Nick had mentioned, I apologize for privileging you out, you can speak to this as well. But, it's a matter of language as to how the capital projects are funded and where they belong. But I'll let you speak to that. But those are the biggest things for this. With the understanding that even though these line items might not be in the capital bill, it doesn't free up that money.
Right.
About $12 million up here or something like that. So it doesn't mean we have $75 million, it's just she wanted the removal of those from the capital bill as a whole.
Because they're not the right fund, I assume. The source of the funding doesn't matter.
Maybe I'll let Nick jump.
I can tell you, and yes, and I'll let Nick talk, 'cause I'll have some comment about that.
So
Well, anything more for Scott? Any questions for Scott?
I'm happy to go and bring answers back to you if need be.
Yeah, it would be helpful to know what they're concerned about.
Well, maybe we might learn some of that as well, so.
As we go through markup, like I said, we just started last week, we've gone through basically the first section here, which is section 2. Most of that section has been done. Section 3 and started into section 4 a little bit, here and there, so not very far yet. Out of 18 sections, so, slow but sure.
Well, cool. Any more for Scott? Thank you, sir, very much. Good.
Nick, if you want to.
Okay.
Yes, please, Nick.
All right, great.
Thank you for coming in, especially just kind of unknown, but thank you and appreciate it very much. And so just to further, I don't know if you were in the room when we started, we are being pretty efficient. We're looking for stuff and this committee's worked really hard. A great committee. They know that, but I'm gonna let them know that as well. So we're getting down to, we're actually getting anxious to have the bill in our hands and anything you want to tell us, especially Scott kind of teed it up a little bit maybe about the St. Albans garage and the youth facility. So whatever you'd like to tell us, we're all ears.
Okay, well, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks committee for having me. This is fantastic. Rarely do I walk in a room not expecting to testify and get the opportunity. Which is great, because we actually do, I think, have some thoughts to share on the current process. So for the record, Nick Kramer, Department of Finance and Management. And I kind of hate to cut cross currents with what Scott was just saying, but I do think it's important to stress at this point, the administration has some pretty serious concerns with what's happening in the House at the moment.
Yep.
And I think really they boiled, I don't want to dive too deeply into one area or the other. First off, thanks a lot to Scott for he's been fantastic to work with. I think you all know this, right? But it's important to give a shout out that we all have some very talented staff and it's been great working back and forth, especially with the reallocation process. Scott mentioned reaching out to departments and that your House counterparts have been very focused on trying to identify potential reallocations as they always do. Scott mentioned so far there's been about $17,000 whole that they've found. I think I just want to underscore one of the reasons for that this year. The whole reallocation process, one of the reasons that's, I think, an effective thing that happens in the House every year is that more information is known at the time of House work and when we put things together. This year, this committee will recall there was a little bit of a last minute exercise on our part to find some money related potentially to the Waterbury Armory project. So we actually had a second sort of a last minute crack at the apple to do that reallocations process. So some of what might normally have trickled out in due course in the House, we kind of already came up with, which is maybe why there's a smaller figure now coming up. So really appreciate that. But I do want to touch on a couple things we have concerns about. So the House in general has been very, very attuned to ARPA dollars. And as this committee will remember, prior year capital bills have had, there's been quite a nexus with ARPA spending, and we're coming up against our first obligation deadline, right? ARPA funds have to be officially obligated by December 31st of this year. So the House is taking a fine-tooth comb to prior year ARPA appropriations and is very concerned about what's been spent and what has not been spent. And Scott and others in that committee have been doing a really great job to interface with departments. I'll say from the administration's perspective, we have known about this obligation deadline for 2 years now, right? As soon as the ARPA funds were awarded, this time frame was known, even as eligibility changed. So what a lot of departments are, and this is what I'm finding, at least in those in my portfolio, a lot of departments are in this position now of having spent 2 or 3 years in some cases of building project pipelines, if you will. Like I'll take Agency of Agriculture as a really good example. They do a lot of water quality work, right? As you can imagine, building a water quality project is a pretty complicated endeavor involving reaching out to farmers, building relationships, often combining complex funding stacks. So they're not projects that are conducive to just getting out overnight, right? But fortunately, what we've had with ARPA is a long runway that agencies have been able to build these in some cases fairly complex project portfolios that are now all in. The plan has always been that they come due this year, right? But what that means is if you look just strictly at a balance sheet of what ARPA funds have been officially put out the door or encumbered, there in some cases may be large unencumbered balances. That doesn't in many cases mean there's not a target for those dollars. It's just sort of part of that natural arc of getting the projects out the door. And I think if we have the administration has a concern, it's that in the very important and admirable effort to make sure that we get all of our ARPA funds obligated, we are hoping that there won't be too much in the way of dramatic last minute reallocations from projects that fit into that category where there's been a lot of work that's gone into getting those projects sort of shovel ready. So I just put a word of caution out there that it's sometimes really difficult to correlate between what you see on a spreadsheet in terms of allocations and whatnot. And like in the case of agriculture, you know, you can imagine if you spent 2 or 3 years cultivating a relationship with a farmer to put forward a water quality project, and then say there were to be a last minute reallocation of that funding dry up, that can be really have some long-term consequences to the agency's relationship with that private land.
Well, I think we can understand that, and I think this committee, you know, impresses me all the time about understanding, you know, the interplay of what goes on. And I would say that if you guys are to that point and anywhere along the way, that you get to it sooner than later. Especially, you know, if we're 2 weeks away from having this bill, you know, we can start having discussions about that. And I would say this, I can imagine it's not just clean water projects that you're looking at with ARPA, but I think that this committee is probably one of the proudest things that we are, is what we have done as far as in the clean water section. And, you know, and we also understand relationships. I mean, we have people that have, you know, been involved on town processes. We know how long it takes to do all that. So if you are bumping up against that and you're feeling some pressure from the House side, we would be asked that, we would ask you to get to us sooner than later with that, because we would understand that. We're not, I don't think that we are feeling the pressure so much in here to where we feel like we gotta go cabbage some money from a project that's well established down the road. Obviously, you know, we're gonna wanna make sure that that money gets expended in the time that it is, so it doesn't go back to some other state that, because we haven't been able to get to it. But I think that we would be very receiving of understanding where those dollars are at and the timeline that it takes to get it out the door.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Chair, and I think, yeah, we have come to very much appreciate and rely on the healthy constitutional tension that is written into our state between the two chambers, right, and the differing perspectives, and fully anticipate this committee is going to be doing some good work on this bill coming forward. So be happy to stay in touch. I mean, I think what you mentioned really touches on the main thing that I wanted to bring up, which is, as Scott pointed out, I think if you look at the funding columns in the governor's recommended capital bill, it may be the case that the bonded dollar appropriations so far, and this is with the disclaimer that they've only, as Scott said, gone through 2 or 3 sections, PGS and DOC are sort of the primary ones. But within the markup that I was part of or privy to before the legislative recess, there were some pretty significant reductions made, especially within BGS. I think to the tune of several $1 million. And most of that coming out of the cash fund. And I think the important context to set here, if it's me speculating, is that as this committee knows, the House appropriations budget construct and the BAA as passed by this legislature used a certain amount of e-board forecast upgrade money that was built into the FY25 governor's recommended operating budget. Used for that in FY24, which creates a pretty significant hole, if you will, that assuming the legislature wants to adopt the governor's recommended budget as a starting point, that money has to be recouped somehow. And what it appears, and again, this is just speculation and obviously sitting on the sidelines, that there may be one thought at work in the House may be to use the cash fund transfer that's part of the governor's recommended FY25 construct, the $10 million to fund this list of things as a way of filling that hole. And so I think accordingly, at least from an observer standpoint, what it seems is that the House has been going through, and if possible, I mean, Chair Emmons has made numerous comments to, well, we don't know if we're gonna have the full $10 million transfer, right? So they've been going through and really taking a pretty sharp instrument, I would say, to the cash fund sections, which is of course their prerogative. We have some.
Can I just stop you for a second, just to make sure my committee's with it, I'm sure that you are. So we're talking about sub-account A, we're talking about those 10 projects, we're talking about that $11.8 million that is in there. And I will say it out loud, you know, I have been whispered to several different times that that cash portion of it is, I've heard all kinds of things like, don't expect any of it, only expect a little bit of it, expect some of it, expect half of it, expect not, you know, all of it, you know, I've heard it all, so it's not surprising, you know, of where that, you know, where that's at, so. Committee, any thoughts or questions about it? You guys are all understand that, you guys are all with that?
Yeah, thanks, Russ. Yeah, I'll just say, as much as we might like to think that that 11 point whatever is sacrosanct, it's not. It's probably going to arrive on our desks. I don't know whether substantially changed is a good way to put it, or marginally changed, or barely changed, but that number is not going to be the same number. I don't think any of us expected that. With the BAA situation, and I think if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, it in essence creates about a $14 million hole. Give or take a few million, probably somewhere in there. That, in other words, what we planned in 25, we took out of the pantry and spent it ahead of time. And all of a sudden there's nothing left. So now how are we going to do that? And this 11 is only all too easy to grab and begin to fill the hole, because I don't think any of us want to increase taxes. You know, it's that constant tension between spending and revenue. And if you don't have the revenue, you got to find it somewhere if you're going to continue to spend at that level. So I'm uncomfortable with that, but I don't think realistically I ever thought that it was just going to arrive there. There's 11 million bucks.
Well, I think that's a good thought process to have, Senator, because I think when we all started this process of the cash fund 2 cycles ago, that we always knew that it would be to that point. But yet again, it doesn't mean that we have to roll over, play dead with it as well. But we've also added a little bit to it as well. We passed out the bill going against what the governor had recommended, close Strawberry Fish Hatchery. I mean, that put a $12 million hole using the governor's math in the budget in itself. So at some point in time, you know, we've created a little bit of that damage ourselves. But you know, it is what it is. It's budgets is sausage making. So you take here and you take there and you put there and you claw some back and you give some up. So, but yeah, I think your assessment of where it is right. That I don't know if anybody's really comfortable. I never was from day one with that. I like the concept of it, but again, saying it out loud that I've said to, very many times, when you dump a pile of cash in this building in the center of it. You might as well throw 2 goldfish in a piranha pen. Yeah, it probably isn't gonna make it out, but doesn't mean that we won't fight as a committee to. Again, and speaking out loud with the committee as well, I think that we all understand. That owning buildings in Vermont is, it costs a lot of money. I think in the BGS part of it, what we see is maintenance. That's what it is. And if you choose to hang on to these buildings and you need to maintain them, and whatever we give up now, it's just gonna cost twice as much later. And I apologize to the 2 senators, new to this committee. I can't remember if, last year, I certainly remember a year before about what delays, cost, and I'm speaking specifically to the HVAC systems doing in this part of the building. That every delay that we had was another 2 million, another 2 million, another 2 million. I think we're gonna see that as far as on anything that we delay coming up, as far as maintenance, especially on buildings. You can always expect that you think you might be saving money, but you're not. It's gonna cost you in the long run.
The only other thing I'd mention, and Irene and I are both are both in Senate Ag, so if that seems to be sort of a sore point in terms of, because what are you looking at, 8 or 9 months from now? Uncle Sam's gonna say, okay, it's not encumbered, give me that money back, please. Or maybe not in those terms. And so it seems to me that if the trajectory is there should be a date. This side of it, that people really start to say, hey, look, we really gotta figure out, is this project gonna be able to be completed? Or do we break it now and still retain, pretty good relationships with farmers down the road? I hope, I know in the agency, the Ag Agency, I find it hard to believe that they didn't also kind of think this through and say, geez, we can't wait till the week before December 31st to say, oh, wow, now what do we do? So,
If I might.
Yes, please,
Chair,
yes,
yeah, I think
open discussion.
your point is well taken, Senator, and definitely, I mean, I can guarantee that we are all on the same team. Nobody wants to send any money back down south to Washington, right? And I think, we generally go through a pretty, scrutinous process, if that's a real word, where we look closely at, what are the official obligations, what are the encumbrances, and then what's in reasonable certainty in the pipeline. And I think, to stick with the Ag Agency, I mean, I have no confidence when those program staff say, we'll get this money out the door by, in most cases, I think they're targeting like later this summer or September, right?
Sure.
They really budgeted a window, but I of course defer to our program staff, but I have a lot of respect for the work they do. Nobody would say, oh yeah, we'll get it out the door if they weren't actually gonna get it out the door. And in some cases, there have been small reallocations, even included as part of the governor's recommended construct, where we knew ahead of time. Ag is one good example. They had 100,000 for one thing that we moved somewhere else because they knew, yeah, we're probably not gonna get to that. But if I can just respond, Chair, to your points earlier, I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head, and I think none of us in this room collectively have any illusions about how this building works and how the dynamics of this available cash, quote unquote, in this time of scarcity are playing out. And I think we all kind of could, to the degree we have crystal balls, could have foreseen ourselves somewhere in this position. What I think, if I can try to distill the administration's concern, and this is a little bit of a reiteration of things I've said before. We understand it's difficult fiscal years. There's different priorities. There are, I would say, rumors around the building about the future of the cash fund generally at this point. And given the dynamics of working across the halls and between 2 committees, there are those who are just rhetorically asking, is this even worth it, right, if we're gonna defund and stuff? And of course, my position will be no stranger to this committee. I mean, we are laser focused on the long-term health of the capital bill.
Yeah.
And if we don't have this tool in our tool belt collectively as a state, I think it's reasonable to say we're gonna be in up the creek in a certain way. The combination of two factors, I mean, the deferred maintenance costs that you're talking about, Mr. Chair, and the fact that the rating agencies are really wising up to deferred maintenance as something that they should be considering as part of their bond assessment, right? So they're seeing, because you can have states that never go out to bond, and so they don't have very much debt. But they might have crumbling infrastructure all over the place, and that's a liability, right? That will materially impact their rating. So I think if Vermont chooses, which is sort of, to me, it feels like we're teetering on the edge of kind of which fiscal path we take, based on very real, challenging circumstances at the moment. But depending on what course we set our compass at, we will either be in a situation where we're really like scratching with our fingernails to try to even fund our capital needs using bonded dollars, because remember, that authorization is going down and down and down. And so some of the narrative that I've heard, at least with your counterparts upstairs, as well, this project isn't ready right now, so let's defer it, right? We'll cut it at this point, we'll put it on the back burner. From my perspective, there's no extra money coming down the pipe, right? If anything, that fund, it's a funnel.
If anything, if I could add to that, with the conversations that are going around with the state now that these aging infrastructure, these school infrastructures, are coming. I mean, now they're gonna be looking for the state to be bonding for those dollars as well. So it isn't like the pressures of just, the BGS buildings that we're talking about. It's the pressures of the Capitol building itself, because we're gonna be getting pressure you see it already. I mean, you see it. I mean, these places wanna, the schools that there's a reason why they got rid of the capital, construction, school funding. It's because they built all what they had to build. And they did it in the '70s and probably the '70s and maybe a little bit of the early '80s. Those buildings now, I mean, we just saw where was it in Woodstock? They had a $99 million bond that they were gonna vote on it, they voted it down. I mean, so those pressures are coming as well. So it's not just what we're facing right now, it's what's expected to come back into the capital bill that really scares me. And I don't know how we're going to be able to, I don't know how we're gonna be able to meet our obligations the way we do right now if we don't have if we don't have that cash part in it. I don't know, you're the money guy. I don't know what we have. If we don't have bonded dollars, if we don't have cash, I don't know what we have after that.
Well, frankly, Chair, neither do I. I mean, that's why we put forward this proposal as it was constructed in the governor's recommend, right? Which is to establish the cash fund as a tool, et cetera, et cetera. So what I would urge or sort of beseech the committee, which I know I have full faith this committee in particular will do, is as you're engaging in the very complex, nuanced conversations unfolding in the current fiscal year and the environment, is any work you can do to concede to the current difficult realities, but try to maintain some sort of foothold and inject some of this into the conversation of, look, yes, we're in a really hard spot now. That's likely not going to get any easier in future fiscal years. And anything we can do to stick to at least some kind of fiscal instrument that can help us avoid even more calamitous times down the road. I mean, I think that's the central tension of budgeting, right? How do you spend sort of the best dollar now to serve both now and into the future? And it's not a job that I envy anyone doing. It's certainly something we engage in every day. But I think we feel very, very strongly, particularly that the capital bill is, it's not a sleepy little side bill.
Right. No, it's pretty substantial.
This is becoming pretty front and center in Vermont's fiscal political landscape. And so I think it's really, if it's not the cash fund, then to your point, Mr. Chair, what is it? How are we as a state intending to grapple with, in a long-term fiscal planning way, our very real pipeline of pressures? And I'm not sure that at this moment, there appears to be consensus on it. So thankful for the work that this committee will do on the bill. We're certainly happy. I'm always available to happy to talk through any particular line items. Again, really appreciate the work Scott and others have been doing. I think it's in very capable hands. It will come to you reflecting the House priorities, and we're certainly happy to comment further. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna switch topic, so in committee, as far as what we talked about now, questions?
Yeah, well, just, something that might be interesting and be a good use of our time is, just, to me, a 2-year capital plan is not a capital plan. I mean, capital plan should be at least 10 years. So if you have stuff prepared that is more long-term, that might be something to see this week. You know,
Sure, so.
I'd really like to see.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to follow up. I would refer you to, the way the biennial capital bill is typically delivered in the first fiscal year. So when Act 69 last year was being developed, the 10-year capital plan is presented as part of that booklet. So if you
Oh.
have those materials somewhere handy enough, it can follow up with
Yeah.
where they live.
Well, they're probably
Every,
on our website.
correct, or
Yeah.
if not, they're on ours. Every department goes through a long.
If we can see that, I
That would be something
I
to
have
look
seen
at.
that, I don't know where we can find it, if you guys, each one of you could just address, if we have them in our, just, address it to us to where we can find that, so we can maybe spend some time with that.
I'd be certainly happy to do that, yeah,
Great.
because I think that's a really important point. And obviously things change in the mid-year cycle of new projects. There's some flux, but that 10-year plan is very much part of why every time there's a significant cut to something, whether it's cash funded or not. I mean, I saw Fort Joe Asia the other day, just shrinking smaller and smaller in his chair, right? Because there's a certain amount of thought that goes into this long range planning. Thank you.
And maybe committee, maybe at some point in time, it's not us that starts the discussion, but, we can start the discussion, we can't really start finger pointing. But maybe it is a time to really start looking at the lease space that we're occupying versus, how much, availability there is out there and what buildings that we can sell. I mean, those are real discussions at some point in time, what's a winner for us, what's a loser for us, and, I know that when I first came here, there used to be a phrasing that went around that, we're really looking to downsize our building count. And I don't hear that discussion much anymore. Obviously, we're looking at, liquidating some of it. We actually gave permission to do that, but, maybe there's a discussion to be had at some point in time, of some, maybe it is time to look, of how much space we're actually using, especially if, trends are, Senator, Harrison, as you pointed out, trends are something that you look at, and if this trend is true to be held, that, people are gonna work from home and they're gonna continue to work from home. The space that we've had to occupy 10 years ago isn't the space that we need looking 10 years forward. So, maybe it is time to, start a discussion about which buildings, that are needing serious maintenance, like we made a decision with on the last 2 buildings. Maybe it is time to start this discussion, start looking at some of those buildings to downsize, the state count of what we own. So, yeah.
So I'll just, a couple of points if I could, 100% in favor of the cash. I see a direct correlation between our bonding capacity and keeping it. It's 4% now is what we grab back, is that right?
The transfer mechanism is based on a 4%.
See, I'd like to-
The general fund.
I know it's probably never gonna happen, I'd like to see it go to 5. And it would create some pain, there's no two ways about it. And the question is, where and how often do you wanna feel that pain? Because if you make it 5, you're taking money from some other place, somewhere in the budget. But I liken it also to 401ks and pension plans and stuff. That sometimes when you're younger, you wanna spend almost every penny you get in your paycheck because it's fun and it's what and you don't start thinking about the future until you're a little bit more advanced. I mean, I didn't have anything in my own life till I was probably 45, and it never even dawned on me.
Yeah,
And then all of a sudden I took one out and I went, oh man, if I only had done this at 25.
exactly. Yeah.
So that's my first point. The second one is, and I see a very similar situation with our schools. The chair mentioned, we've got deferred maintenance on a bunch of buildings that we're frankly not putting 100% usage into. you know, they stand empty in some respects. I don't know what percentage of it. But we're still paying to put electricity in the building and to heat it and maybe cool it up. And the same thing is true, I think, in the school situation. We just saw a rather, I think, strong pushback by about a third of the school budgets that were defeated. And I know in my own community, Proctor High School and West Rutland High School have been traditional rivals in athletics, and they're very close physically to each other. And they're graduating 12, 15, 16 kids every year. And if you bring up merger in either of those two towns, you get an immediate negative response. But I think it's time to start thinking about that consolidation again, because we can't keep doing this and having them graduate that few kids. So I see a similar situation with respect to the buildings that we have. It's never gonna be very comfortable to get a lot of this accomplished, because there are pressure points along the way, there's no question.
I think you even have to look nationally as far as in that. I mean, I was reading the other day in my business, you guys know what I do. But it's starting to be a push nationally for a lot of these people now starting, they're not making the strategic decisions now to own homes. They're actually starting to make a strategic decision to, I'm gonna be a renter for the rest of my life, and this is how I'm gonna prioritize my money. So I know that right now with the cost of what it takes to own a home, and everyone's, yeah, but that's gonna change, but yeah, maybe it's gonna take 10 or 15 years to flip, but at that point in time, you could be very well established down the road as far as, you know, how you prioritize, you know, you could take your monies for 15 years and you can do your 401ks quicker, as you pointed out. And so you get down that road further, 15 years further down the road, you've made that flip.
Yeah.
You have created that structure in your life. So you know what? Now I've got this in building, I'm not gonna own a home, I don't have time now to go out and buy a home and to spend that type of money and wait for the natural transformation of the market to flip, so that my home now is my biggest provider of my retirement. I made that decision 15 years ago, and that's what I've done. And so, yeah, I mean, I think they're all discussions that we should have. Senator Harrison started out with looking at the trends of how it is, but I think it's a very great discussion. I too understand what the cash fund will do. I understand, I of all things understand the power of what it could be. Already I look at that $10 million that we've had and it turned into 11.8. That was just in a short amount of time, and which leads me, if we're done, which leads me to the other, I just wanna make sure it's safe. And please, everybody wants to jump in and say that sub-account B, we don't have any pressures on that. Nobody's talking about, looking at that, I hope.
Mr. Chair, unfortunately couldn't speak for what's going on within the confines of the House Appropriators heads at the moment. I have not heard anything. I think the only thing that's really left, I guess, in cash fund B are the IIJA reserves that were set aside last year. I think, and I hope, or I would, that the case was pretty compellingly made in both of the AOT case and ANR, that those are funds very, very well spent in terms of the federal return, right? For AOT, I think for every one state dollar we set aside in match, we get 4. For ANR, it's actually closer to 12. Yeah. So it's a really, really good bang for our buck. So I'm really hopeful that those won't be in the mix at all. I mean, I will point out 1 or 2 items that were considered for reduction in the House, in Chair Emmons' committee, were actually FY24 cash fund appropriations. So just a flag that, you know, the FY24 BAA has already passed. If those are reduced or altered in any way, that would have to occur in the C section of the current big bill. So there's just some minor logistical things that I can follow up with Scott about that. My concern is that in the, well, I think I've articulated my concerns. To Senator Collins' point about setting aside money now to benefit yourself or the state itself in the future. I mean, to me, the crux talking point, such as I've been wandering around chirping about this, right, is that we have a choice now, we have a discretionary choice, how much money we put towards this use. And my concern is to depend, that choice is pretty time limited. If we choose to put more now, we may set ourselves up better in the future. If we don't, if we choose not to now, it is, I would say, veritably certain that at a certain point, our debt service costs will creep back up over that. And then it's not discretionary, right? We as a state have statute that says we pay our debt service, thank goodness. But we don't, then neither the governor at that time, nor the legislature will have an opportunity to make that choice in the future, right? We'll be beholden to whatever deferred maintenance or debt costs we incur now. And so it's that, again, it's the classic tension of how do you balance pressing current needs with long-term fiscal solvency, and very much respect the work of this body in grappling with that.
I just have to say, I think it would be a better argument of the governor if incremental increases in fees were done. Because fees are supposed to increase gradually so that it's not a hit and cover the costs of maintaining. So that's not happening, and the legislature has to do that on our own and has been vilified for it. So that's frustrating to me, especially in the transportation fund, which is supposed to be self sustaining, which it should be and could be.
Well, traditionally, the fee bill came up every 3 years,
So
but that traditional.
what's up with that? Yeah.
Because they need money.
Well, I think the governor's position on that is that those fees were raised, but they were raised in other parts of government. So you get to a balance of what can your populace support? And when the governor looks at, okay, so we need this much money. Just because it didn't come from transportation doesn't mean those fees weren't raised someplace else. And I think that's the governor's point, is that just because it didn't raise in transportation didn't mean that we didn't raise those monies elsewhere. And so he looked at it as like, hey, listen, we can fund transportation in a different way. It doesn't have to all come from transportation. You folks, speaking as the governor, you folks chose to raise the monies over here. So, we only have so much money that we can ask our citizens to support, and you guys did it another way. You didn't do it in the T-bill. You raised it over here, and so that's just the way it is. So I think that's why the governor said we didn't need to raise it in the transportation fund. You already raised it. You already raised those fees. You did it elsewhere.
Well, the transportation fund is in a downward spiral.
I wouldn't say it's a spiral.
Well,
I wouldn't say it's a spiral. I would say that we certainly could get there quicker as far as to, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressures on the transportation fund that, because I'm in there, there's a lot of pressure on the transportation fund that isn't transportation related. That should come from general fund. And if the transportation fund was left alone all by itself, it would support itself very, very fine. But there's a lot of cabbaging that's coming out of the transportation fund that isn't transportation related. So, that is, if it was left alone, it'd be fine, but it's not left alone. There's $20 to $40 million that are robbed out of there every year that goes to things that aren't transportation related.
okay.
So it's not not the fees. In fact, the governor said, don't raise the fees this year.
Right.
Leave the money alone that you're gonna steal from it. And we'll be fine. So that was his battle, which he lost.
Right, but thank goodness we raised those fees.
Well, no,
because otherwise, then
no, that's not
we
true.
would be left.
Actually, it's not true. Maybe we should have just left the money alone in the transportation fund and not taken that money, not taking it for other parts of the,
Yeah, I
to
don't know
fund
what you mean
government.
by other parts,
Well,
but I,
I can get those numbers for you, but yes. So the transportation fund, if it's left alone, if monies wasn't taken from the transportation fund to support other parts of government, the transportation fund would be fine all by itself.
okay,
And they would be.
that's not my understanding.
Yeah.
But Vermont is not alone in this, transportation funds all over the country are having this problem. it's been happening for decades because the gas tax is not keeping up with,
Yeah, I don't know.
expenses.
Yeah, I just
And
don't
it's
know
just,
about
it's
that.
really hard to find other revenues.
But DMV did testify they didn't need or want the 20%.
Well,
And so did OPR,
and,
which was another 11
but
or
they
12 million.
obviously needed it.
No,
Because they
no,
don't make all the
no,
money.
they didn't need it. The legislature needed it.
Right.
There lies the difference.
Some of it went to fund other social programs, like childcare and other things that we did.
Right.
It didn't all stay in the transportation.
That's
Right,
interesting.
right.
Alright, well, then I would like to know more about that at some point. I don't know if this group would be the right place.
Chat with your leadership.
But we have the St. Albans garage in this too,
We-
so I
Yeah, but-
don't know if
So I
that's
want to talk
what
about
way.
that, because Nick can talk about that, but I can tell you what's happened with that. Is that the reason why the St. Albans garage has got in here was because a lot of the cash fund portion of it, and then at the end, it was a decision made by appropriations on how they were taking some of that monies. And so they made the deal, appropriations made the deal and said, okay, well, we're gonna take this money. We're gonna take this money that you guys have, that you and transportation have. We're gonna take your money, but we're gonna make it up to you. And we're gonna bond it in appropriation, I
So
mean,
maybe, so was,
institutions.
so you're saying the St. Albans was
Yeah, the St.
the
Albans garage,
trade
it
for
was,
the other? that you're
St. Albans
saying?
was in trade for cash, to take from our cash fund. So that's how it got there. So that's how we ended up with a transportation project, a lot like what I just said. You would have left the St. Albans garage in transportation and left it alone. And didn't make the deals to steal the cash that we have in the cash fund. Then you would have ended up with we would have ended up with a transportation, in our institutions bill. So that's what happened. A lot goes to the discussion we just had previous.
Okay.
So that's how we ended up with it. Nick, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think that's a fair assessment, Chair. I mean, if I can interject, the logistical reason why it showed up in the governor's recommended capital bill this year is just, as I have spoken to at length before, we made every attempt to bring all of any cash funded project that was a capital project in nature back into the capital bill for a variety of reasons. That project in particular, along with, I think Scott mentioned, the youth inpatient facility through DMH, struck us as capital projects, physical infrastructure things, and they were funded out of the cash fund, so we felt, for all of the reasons we've discussed, which that argument I think has been stated, rejected, and we don't need to revisit, but so per the House's construct, those will be removed from the capital bill and they've already been restored in the original appropriating bill language as part of the BAA. Our proposal was two-part. We were striking them from the operating budget and putting them in the capital bill. The BAA, as it's passed the legislature, has already struck them from the has struck our strikeout. So they are still in the original operating bill last year. So now they're just striking them out of the GovRec capital.
But they're still in the general.
They're still there in the general. And to your question about fees, Senator Harrison, I mean, I can appreciate your perspective and frustration. As always, would be more than happy to meet up sometime
Sure.
to discuss. I think the chair did a great job at describing some of the nuances, the differences of opinion about spending, like what is necessary spending versus what revenue we need to meet necessary spending. And I think the truth, sadly, like many things, is that every single fee we administer as a state is different. Some of them have more pressure, some of them have less pressure. And so there are people even beyond me who would be really happy to hear to speak to.
Sure.
Thank you for.
What else?
I think anything else I say would really be beating a dead horse at this point.
Get done.
So I really appreciate your time listening to me and the opportunity for dialogue. I mean, it's not an easy process, this whole thing, and thank you all for your time and consideration. We'll be here.
Well, we appreciate both of you.
Yeah, sure.
We're interested, again, in both of what you brought forward. We're certainly interested in, as they move forward, we're certainly interested you know, where the governor who proposes the Capitol bill, is at, and any concerns that you have, you know, again, we got a very smart committee, we have a very, committed committee, I believe, and I think that we do see the whole picture, we might be Republicans, Democrats, but I think that we have very thoughtful discussions, and I think at the end of the day, we wanna do good committee work, and I feel that we do that, so. Anything that you can do to, both of you to keep us on track with that, I would really appreciate that. So, anything else?
Also,
Just feels like deja vu all the way. Yeah.